Here are the different type of logos we're going to be creating grid lines for with Gridit's gridline sensitivity slider. First, we have this geometric logo, which consists of straight lines. There are no diagonal lines or no curves whatsoever. The best gridline sensitivity for this type of logo is a sensitivity of 0. For these examples, we have outlines and grid lines only selected, and we're just going to be selecting generate. So I'm going to change the gridline sensitivity slider to 0, and now we're going to generate. Because there are only straight lines in this logo, whether you do a sensitivity of 1 or 2, the results will be the same. Now this logo consists of straight lines and diagonal lines. The best gridline sensitivity for this logo is 0 and 1. If the gridline sensitivity is set to 0, only straight grid lines will be generated. However, if the gridline sensitivity is set to 1, straight lines and diagonal grid lines will be generated. With diagonal shapes, grid lines are usually generated with angles at 45 degrees. If you have shapes in your logo that is more or less than 45 degrees, the best gridline sensitivity you want to use is 1. To show you an example, I will reduce the angle of this shape here. Now, if we change the gridline sensitivity to 0 and we hit generate, you can see that this grid line for this angle didn't generate. However, if we do this again and change the gridline sensitivity to 1, you can see the grid line for this angle has now been generated. The next logo we want to look at is one with only curves. Curves are usually shown by the Bezier handles within the logo. So you can see the angles within the Bezier handles are vertical or horizontal. The best gridline sensitivity for this type of logo with curved shapes is 2. When the gridline sensitivity is set to 2, grid lines are generated based on the horizontal, vertical angles of the Bezier handles. However, if you use a gridline sensitivity of 0 and 1 on curved shapes, no grid lines will be generated. Next, we have a logo that has straight lines, diagonal lines, and curves. The best gridline sensitivity for this type of logo is 2. The grid lines that appear are a combination of the previous examples shown. Straight grid lines, diagonal grid lines, and grid lines for curved shapes. This gridline sensitivity option is best for a geometric logo that has a mixture of different shapes. Now this is an example of a full combination logo, which consists of a Logomark and a Logotype. The best gridline sensitivity options for this type of logo is 0 and 1. When the gridline sensitivity is set to 0, you get a clean, consistent construction grid with vertical, horizontal, and diagonal grid lines. If we was to change the gridline sensitivity to 1, you will start to see red lines appear. These red lines are shown in the layer panel as potential errors, so it may be something you want to check out. However, if your logo type does consist of complex diagonal grid lines, you can simply just hide this layer. Lastly, we have a calligraphy word mark. These usually consist of straight lines, diagonal lines, and a lot of curves. The best gridline sensitivity for this type of logo is a sensitivity of 2. Although your construction grid may look like this after you generate, you can also hide the potential errors layer. You can then make any changes to your construction grid, such as removing or adding additional grid lines.